Okay, well, before we get started, let me go ahead and read the medical disclaimer. So the information provided is for educational purposes and is not intended or a substitute for medical advice from a physician or other qualified healthcare professional. We do not diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any illness or disease, and you should always consult with your doctor or healthcare professional for medical advice or information about diagnosis and treatment. This information in this presentation has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration or any other medical body. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Dr. Dori and I'm your host on today's call. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a clinical researcher and an author of several books. So welcome everyone to our call with Clayton Thomas, who is the chairman and founder of Root. Clayton has over 25 years of experience in the health and wellness industry, and for the last 16 years, he's focused on detoxification and nutraceutical formulations. A simple philosophy, cure the cause. Hello, Clayton, and welcome to our Tuesday call.
Happy Tuesday. And here's my question.
Mm-hmm.
What's the subject?
Oh, well, today we're going to discuss diabetes.
Oh, I'm so excited because, well, I don't have it.
Well, that's good. So we're going to talk about diabetes, environmental toxicity, and clinoptilolite. But first, I'm going to just recap our talk from last week. So last week, we had a special guest, Dr. Stefan Rao, who is a virologist, a human biologist, and an author. He discussed the dynamic model of homeostasis, polyphenols, and zero-in, and viruses, and how we can get back into homeostasis. And Dr. Rao informed us that a healthy person has a good ability to regulate. For example, someone who regulates well cannot be chronically ill. And when you have a chronic disease, there is a disorder in your regulation. So it's not the disease that impairs your ability to regulate, but the disturbed regulation abilities that lead to illness. And the fourth regulation disorder, he said, can be caused by many factors influencing your health. And there are three that he mentioned that you have the ability to change. So he said that you have to look at your food, do some exercise, have good mind and emotions. And these three things you can influence your health with. Let me just quit that. Okay. So I thought we'd look at the world stats on diabetes, because diabetes is a common chronic disease, has multiple complications which contribute to the global health burden. And it is the top 10 cause of mortality and reduced life expectancy. It's characterized, excuse me, by chronic hyperglycemia. So that is high levels of sugar or glucose in the blood. And it's induced by a triad of symptoms such as polydipsia, which is increased thirst, polyuria, which is frequent or excessive urination, and polyphagia, which is excess hunger. And as you can see from this slide, there are certain countries where it's more prevalent, but worldwide increase is staggering. I mean, just look at the numbers here. It's crazy. In Asia, like Western Pacific is really bad, which we'll see later. So as we can see here, diabetes affects people of all ages, typically showing a higher prevalence with increase in people with this age between 60 and 69. And I got to thinking about that too, thinking like, why is this age so much higher? And then I thought, well, okay, maybe this has to do with, people retiring, starting to travel, living more of the good life, this kind of thing. But I thought this group here was quite interesting. And then 1 in 5 people over 65 have diabetes. And if you look at this slide here, 1 in 3 in the Western Pacific region are at risk for developing diabetes. And those are the countries in those areas there, in the Western Pacific region. So what is diabetes? Well, diabetes is a chronic disease that occurs when the pancreas is no longer able to make insulin, or when the body cannot make good use of the insulin it produces. And insulin is a hormone that's made by the pancreas that acts like a key to let the glucose from the food that we eat pass from the bloodstream into the cells in the body to produce energy. So there are 3 types of diabetes. We have type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and gestational diabetes.
And now type 3.
Are you talking about pre-diabetes?
Nope,
Or are you talking about?
Hit on it.
Oh, I have something else. Oh, I have a surprise for you. You just wait and see. We're not done yet.
Oh.
Okay, so type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. It's sometimes called juvenile diabetes because it's often diagnosed in children and teens. Basically, what happens here is the pancreas can't make insulin because the immune system attacks it and destroys the cells that produce insulin. So kids and teens with type 1 diabetes are at risk for other autoimmune problems. There are no lifestyle changes that you can make to lower the risk of type 1 diabetes. So with type 2 diabetes is where the body does not produce enough insulin, or the body's cells do not react to insulin. So with type 2 diabetes, your body doesn't use insulin well and can't keep blood sugar at normal levels. So this used to be known as age onset diabetes because it took many years to develop, but now we're seeing more and more in children, teens, and young adults being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And this is, type 2 diabetes can be prevented or delayed with healthy lifestyle changes, such as losing weight, eating, whole-based foods, healthy foods, and being active. Gestational diabetes. So gestational diabetes occurs during pregnancy when there are high levels of blood glucose due to the inability to produce insulin. This condition develops in pregnant women who have never had diabetes, and it usually goes away after your baby is born. However, it increases your risk for type 2 diabetes later in life. And in addition, your baby could be at high risk for health problems and is more likely to develop obesity and type 2 diabetes as well. So women who develop gestational diabetes the first 5 months of pregnancy are 42% more likely to have an autistic child. Experts believe that the spike in the mother's blood sugar levels may disrupt fetal brain development. So one study examined the prenatal records of more than 322,000 mothers with gestational diabetes and found almost 3,400 of their children were later diagnosed with autism. But to put it into perspective, the risk of having a child with autism is about 1.5%. Gestational diabetes raises the risk to a little over 2%, according to that study. And then in a later study, the same lead researcher studied the risk of autism in mothers with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Her team looked at more than 400,000 children, and they compared a higher risk of being diagnosed with autism compared to children whose mothers did not have any form of diabetes. And again, the research group found that higher autism risk with gestational diabetes diagnosed by 26 weeks of pregnancy. So the correlation, meaning the link or an association, does not equal causation, but discovering a correlation may be the first step in proving a cause and effect. So this was something really interesting here. Insulin connection, Alzheimer's, and vascular dementia. So although insulin is in the periphery is well understood, less is known about the role in the brain. And insulin does more than just control blood sugar. It's actually a growth factor. So neurons, you know, your brain cells are very dependent on growth factors. And if they don't get enough, they die. So researchers also found that insulin lost its effectiveness as a growth factor, even in people who did not have diabetes. However, emerging evidence from human and animal studies indicate that insulin influences cerebral bioenergetics, enhances synaptic viability and dendritic spine formations, and increases neurotransmitter turnover, such as dopamine. So insulin also has a role in proteostasis, which is protein homeostasis. It influences, influences the clearance of this amyloid beta peptide and the phosphorylation of the tau, which we've talked about this before, Clayton, on other talks about the amyloid plaques that get built up. And so this is, hallmark for Alzheimer's disease.
That's diabetes type 3.
Ha ha. Okay, so we're going to go back a little bit here on insulin, but you'll see why. So basically, you can see here insulin resistance, and here's a diagram of a healthy person. So again, food, when we eat food, food becomes glucose. It enters the bloodstream and the blood glucose level goes up. So after a meal, the digestive tract breaks down the carbohydrates, changes them into glucose. When the glucose is absorbed into the bloodstream through the lining in the lining of your small intestine. Once glucose enters the bloodstream, insulin causes the cells throughout your body to absorb the sugar and use it for energy. So insulin is made by the pancreas. It's a gland located behind your stomach. It acts as a key to unlock the body cells and let the glucose in. So it allows your body to use the glucose for energy. And then the glucose leaves the bloodstream and enters the cell. And then the cells turn the glucose into energy, and then the glucose level should return to normal. So glucose is a type of sugar found in many carbohydrates. Insulin helps balance the glucose. And when there's too much glucose in the bloodstream, insulin signals your body to store the excess in your liver. So the stored glucose isn't released until your body's glucose level decreases, or, such as like between your meals and when your body is stressed, or, you need an energy boost, which is, this point here, I think is important to note that, this is why like snacking or like a lot of frequent, like you need to have this time when you're not eating in between. Okay, so this leads us to the twin cycle hypothesis. This is really interesting, the twin cycle hypothesis. This has been around for many years. So it's based on the Newcastle diabetes reversal diet. So type 2 diabetes has long been regarded like as a chronic disease, and the Newcastle University professor Roy Taylor, using an innovative magnetic resonance method, has confirmed his twin cycle hypothesis. It's caused by fat within the liver and the pancreas. And in the liver, this fat causes a poor response to insulin and produces too much glucose. And in the pancreas, the fat inhibits the insulin secretion. So this work by Dr. Taylor, termed the twin cycle hypothesis, postulates that chronic calorie excess leads to accumulation of liver fat, which spills over into the pancreas. So for the first time, scientists have actually observed, observing people developing type 2 diabetes, and confirmed that the fat overspill from the liver into the pancreas triggers the chronic condition. So when fat cannot be safely stored under the skin, it is then stored inside the liver, and the overspill to the rest of the body, including the pancreas. And this clogs up the pancreas, switching off the genes which direct how the insulin should be effectively be produced, and this causes type 2 diabetes, which is why, they were talking about you know, you can see like some people can gain a lot of weight, they don't get diabetes. And then whereas you can see somebody very skinny end up with diabetes. And this has to do with the liver, the too much fat in the liver spilling over to the pancreas.
Skinny fat.
Mm-hmm. So then we have, this is what happens in diabetes. It affects your entire body, your brain, your heart, your extremities, your peripheral vascular. You get peripheral vascular disease, kidney neuropathy, coronary artery disease. You have diabetic retinopathy. Okay. So it's also good to get familiar with your numbers and know where you should be. So, pollution by metals. Is there a relationship in glycemic control? So one of the least studied effects, but which is currently becoming more important, is the effect of metals on glycemic control. Metals have been implicated as causes of chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and are associated, as we know, with obesity, hyperglycemia, and even diabetes. So, for example, arsenic, iron, mercury, lead, cadmium, nickel have been studied as risk factors for hyperglycemia and diabetes. Zinc and magnesium and chromium deficiencies is associated risk with diabetes as well. Oh, so here's Clayton's favorite study. So this study is the effect of natural clinoptilolite and nanosized clinoptilolite supplementation on glucose levels and oxidative stress in rats with type 1 diabetes, which I thought this was really interesting because how this nanosized clinoptilolite actually exerted a hypoglycemic effect, which is, I think, Clayton, you want to hit on that one. And the other thing too is that silica, right, could almost perfectly prevent the advance of spontaneous diabetes and hyperglycemia in these young biobreeding rats. So in this study, the hypoglycemic activity, you can see that what they're talking about here was the presence of the compound of silica. So, it's well-known absorption properties of zeolite can also reduce the glucose level in blood. So we'll go back to that in a minute. So that was, for type 1 diabetes. And then this study I thought was really interesting. This is the effect of natural nanosized clinoptilolite and look at that, Clayton, Nigella sativa.
Uh-oh, we know.
Yeah, we know what's coming. Merry Christmas. Supplementation on the serum bone markers, and these are in diabetic rats. So this is, I thought was really interesting because they were talking here about type 2 diabetes and how beneficial it was for type 2 diabetes. So the combination of Nigella sativa with clinoptilolite in preventing and reducing some of these diabetic related disorders have been demonstrated. Okay, and then I wanted you guys to see also, like, these are just some of the studies I pulled. I mean, look at this, like cadmium exposure. Cadmium's all over here. Cadmium type 2 diabetes, cadmium here, environmental cadmium, urinary cadmium. I mean, toxic metal. Okay, so here we go. Toxic metals in cord blood and later development of type 1 diabetes. I mean, we cover the whole spectrum. We're going from, childbearing years all the way up to, the baby boomers. It's everybody, we're toxic. We're toxic from the time we're born. And we've talked about this.
You could honestly say from womb to tomb, right?
Oh, absolutely. And like, look at this one here, between blood cadmium here, lead, mercury, cadmium, maternal blood cadmium and lead concentration and gestational diabetes. So all of these things, all of these studies support the use, like of the clenoptilolite. And so I thought this was really interesting to show you guys that there is a lot of scientific information, a lot of clinical studies, that this is not something that, there's real science behind this. So Clayton, I give you the floor.
Well, I think the first thing to hit on is just what you're looking at as far as research, but like we talk about from womb to tomb, and it's so important as everything that we try to hit home for people is you're not your diagnosis, right? And Mark knows this, and there's been so many different cases that the way the allopathic community is built is looking at a bunch of symptomology, and then based on the symptoms that you show, it could be through your lab work, it could be through enzymes, it could be through physical, it could be through family history, that based on that information, they can give you a diagnosis. And then based on a diagnosis, they're going to prescribe accordingly based on managing and treating the symptomology. And what, Dori was hitting on, and I think what you saw in a couple clinical studies is just a snippet of the abstract that she's put together so far. I mean, you really start to dive into the data and it'll make you sick. But people aren't sick. We're just polluted. And, I try to explain to people that it's from autism to Alzheimer's and everything in between, right? It's womb to tomb. How long do we need to work on cleaning ourselves up? It's from the time that you're an egg and a sperm, honestly. And then when they get to come together in the womb, that's when the problems start. As we look at the risks for type 1 diabetes, right? Gestational or childhood onset. What really intrigued me was looking at some of the research on Down syndrome. And we think that Down syndrome is a genetic issue, but it's actually not genetic. And if you look at the data on the rates of Down syndrome, and really correlates to what Dori was putting up on the rates of diabetes, because it's the same application. The longer you're here without doing anything, the more polluted you become. So apply that in a couple different aspects. If you're a woman and you're in your 40s, I believe it's 10 or 12% statistics of risk of what, I just lost my term. I just took my zero in too, for Down syndrome, right? So you have a 10 to 12% chance of having a kid with Down syndrome if you're in your 40s and you're wanting to have babies. Why? Because you're a freaking cesspool. And what the literature shows is that because of the time that a woman's been here, the mercury that is passed into the placenta causes damage, DNA damage, early on in conception, which causes Down syndrome. So you have all these factors that go on in the womb. We don't know our body burden, right? When a woman carries to term, we won't get into miscarriage rates and everything. That's another conversation. But when a woman carries to term, not tomb, that comes later, hopefully. You have this body burden, whatever your body is at as far as its level of toxic exposure. And like Dori and I have gone over, and I think you guys have all looked at, the Environmental Working Group published this in 2005. I mean, it's not science fiction. It is science fact that we are a beautiful cesspool. And those metals, those toxins affect each one of us differently. And so you don't know how they're going to play an influence on your life. You just know that they're there. And when you look at what Dori was tying together with diabetes, right? And the correlation to these other issues, but we know autism, we know dementia, we know all these other issues are correlated to heavy metal toxicity. So how could one more thing not be? Because all the correlative data is there. But like I was mentioning and alluding to, I think it was about 5 or 10 years ago that they started to have the conversation about diabetes type 3. Because when you get into your 50s and 60s, you have people that start to have cognitive function, Alzheimer's, dementia. But those things are correlated to the development of tau, which Dori was touching on. So what does the data that's been published for over 30 years talk about with the development of tau? It's called chronic toxic encephalopathy, CTE. The same mechanisms that happen in athletes when they get their heads rattled that causes an increase in ionic activity in parts of the brain, that those heavy metals that are in your brain and sometimes spread out will migrate to and create that tau much earlier on in life. But if you're polluted and you're toxic, over time, the neurotoxic metals are going to conglomerate together to build up tau. And that's where you have Alzheimer's and dementia and neurological issues. What happens when the metals are in your liver and they build up in fat in your liver, and then it goes to your pancreas, and then it changes your blood sugar? And if you look on Root Your Life, I think it came from, I think the testimonial and the lab work came from Ukraine, I believe. So I think her data is on the Root Your Ukraine group as well on Facebook. But we've seen people have clinical high blood pressure, clinically high cholesterol, and diabetes. And I think for her results, it was 60 days, and her A1C levels went from like 9.7 down to 7.2. Her triglycerides dropped, her HDLs went up, her LDLs went down. I'm going off the top of my head, and I think there was a couple other markers that stabilized as well. So why is that? Because it goes back to the simple philosophy. You're not sick. You don't have a syndrome. You don't have a disease. You're just really polluted. And if you remove these chemicals, these toxins, these biotoxins, the bad viral particles, because as Dr. Rao talked about last week, and as he's gone over a couple times, and granted, he's only a PhD virologist. I don't know. What are you going to say to that? You go, I don't know. Do you know what you're talking about? Wee bit. The microbiome and the microbiome of the body, we have viruses in us. You have good ones, you have bad ones. But if you don't take care of this, if you're not in balance, then you're susceptible to chaos. That chaos can be diagnosed as cancer. It can be diagnosed as diabetes. It can be diagnosed as autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, MS, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, bad attitude, rheumatoid arthritis, pick it, right? It doesn't matter. You are not your symptoms. You are not your diagnosis. You're just trying. Right. So it all comes back to the same little focus. We're polluted. I mean, and there you go. And so I think, Dori, what else do you want to hit on with it? Because you nailed most of it, as you are so good at. And I have to thank you for the. I was trying to do a PowerPoint for my conversation that's going to take place in an hour or in 30 minutes regarding all the zeolite Q&As. I couldn't get through 2 slides. So, I'm terrible at that stuff. I'm just going to start flipping through websites and pulling up data because I suck at this stuff. But the way you presented it's amazing. And I think that's a big thing for people to understand is that this is, you simplify it greatly, but it really, here's the key to making sure that you don't get diabetes. Clean yourself up. This is.
I thought it was, I thought, when I decided on that topic, I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to do a couple slides. I'm going to talk about diabetes. But then I started this morning, I found the type 3 diabetes. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I got to put this on my slide. And then I started digging more. And I thought, just even before the call, I thought, oh, there's even more stuff. And and I'm just like, just getting the tip of it. I'm not even like really diving deep into it because but you can see like all the connections. I love making these little connections, right?
Yeah.
It's not just, okay, I have type 1 diabetes or I have type 2 diabetes, because if you look at the studies, they're talking about, okay, like take this drug, do this, these things. And we're going beyond that, right? So,
Well, I think this is such a crucial component of the power of community, right? And we've talked about this, and we have some extremely dynamic personalities from an intellectual perspective with you, with Stefan. I'll give him credit because he's the resident male in this group of amazing PhDs. And we've got Christina's background, amongst others. And then we have 13,000 plus case studies so far of all these different amazing people of all ages, from infants now to geriatrics and everywhere in between, to look at data. And all we're doing is correlating case studies and experiences and applying that to real science, right? And if you don't have an agenda, I think this is the important part when it comes to research, because a lot of what is published, has a purpose behind it for some reason. But if you start really diving into it, I won't say altruistically, but with the intent of trying to find solutions, you come back to the same basis. It's just a matter of toxicity. It's an issue that compounds every year that we're here. It's worse today than it was yesterday, last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago. It's not getting any better. It's not going to improve. And like Dr. Rao has touched on a couple times, I mean, we have all of our environmental issues that we're aware of, and now we have to deal with microplastics in the oceans. And so you look at these issues and they're expanding. I mean, 10 years ago, who was talking about microplastics and nanoplastics and what those are going to do for liver function and GI function, and how they're going to affect us, and what's coming out of the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, because of what's happening to the food supply. I mean, and how are all those things going to affect us? We don't have a freaking clue. But it's a matter of just knowing and understanding. Look, the most important thing you can do is just clean up yourself, clean up your system, clean your room, as we tell our kids, right?
which is actually a good point that you bring up, Clayton, because a lot of people think, oh, this is just kind of a one-off and just do it for a couple months or 3 months. But no, you have to keep on going. You can, like, initially maybe you have like kind of a loading period that you do, and then you can maybe trap down a little bit and then just have a maintenance dose. But we're constantly being inundated with toxins every day, right?
Minute, every freaking second. I think what my numbers are probably going to be off. I think it's over 20, is it 20 or 60 cubic feet of air that we inhale on a daily basis, and all of it's polluted. Can't get away from it. And Dr. Rao has hit on that a few times, and I know in one of the first conversations we did that air pollution is our biggest issue we face, but people don't really address it. And what's important to understand is that wearing a mask is not going to help you. You can wear the mask all you want, but your mask is not going to help you.
So I unmuted Dr. Rao if he'd like to make a comment on anything.
No, please.
please mute me.
some new informations for me about the diabetes 3, and there's one last year there was one paper about the diabetes 3 that's called Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a diabetes 3 disease.
Yeah.
Last year I read this.
So you look at that and you go, well, it had one title. Now they're giving it a different title because the etiology that was published in like I think it was 1980 or 1990 with the study of chronic toxic encephalopathy. They're like, look, this is what dementia and Alzheimer's is. And you do the research on what chronic toxic encephalopathy is. It's caused by mercury and aluminum in the brain. So you go, all right. Yeah, it's like, okay, let's change the diagnosis, because what does a different diagnosis allow pharma to do? More drugs. Yeah. And
you have to look at the other diseases also, the exocrine pancreatitis, for example, tumors and other diseases are dependent on the diabetes 3. Yeah.
Can you say exocrine again? I love it when you use words like that.
Exocrine again?
Yeah. So
the Salk Institute made a new category for diabetes type 4.
Diabetes type 4 is the digestive diabetes you told about before.
No, they're saying here type 4 is associated
type
with older
type
age.
Type 2,
type 3.
We are talking about the Alzheimer's disease, and type 4 is the digesting diabetes. This is the right pronunciation, the right number.
There's actually 5.
Oh
wait,
yes.
now my God,
I thought it was
ridiculous. Just keeps going up here.
I thought it was the number 4 by the Diabetic Association in America.
You got to make it a handful. I mean, 4 is not enough. You got to make.
Go big. I only know 4.
Yeah, 1 for the thumb.
You'll find the next one in the next years, I think.
Yeah,
so.
there's 5. Immune diabetes, autoimmune diabetes, insulin deficient diabetes, insulin resistant diabetes. Dori. Yeah, I know. I'm just saying.
1 diabetes is enough.
It's exactly. All right. Well, let's
a couple questions.
Let's look at some questions. Yeah.
Hit on here real quick.
Oh, Mark wants to talk for a minute.
Well, Mark can talk as much as he wants.
I unmuted you, Mark.
Football.
Hi, listen. This talk about Alzheimer's is really, really prevalent in the UK, and ironically, amongst so-called high-performance athletes, they are really scared in football and rugby, and they're blaming it all down to heading the football or getting involved in a right ruck at rugby. I don't buy it. I say when I was a professional footballer, we used to practice to build our neck strength with a medicine ball. So, the head was getting a right good pounding. Okay, I might have dementia, I might be slightly off the scale a bit sometimes, but I'm wondering, and maybe Clayton can elaborate on this, and Dr. Rao as well, is that sportsmen, obviously they're highly tuned, they're very physically fit, they're very healthy, they have supposedly very stable and controlled nutritional diets. But are the vitamins and minerals they're putting inside in them that's increasing their metal? Are they taking, is there a metal within their diet that's causing this problem or potentially causing Alzheimer's?
I can't remember your question.
Well, Alzheimer's in sportsmen.
See, you get my point. So here's the thing that's really important. Growing up, being an athlete, and then I realized that I was melanin deficient when I got to college. But you look at a lot of the elite athletes, the professional athletes. What are they? Right? They're human. They're genetic anomalies a lot of times because of being mesomorphs and having specific gifts physically and with proprioception and such. But here's the intriguing part with a lot of these athletes, especially in the United States. If you look at basketball, you look at football, you look at many of the sports, where their families come from are completely toxic environments. I mean, LeBron James, they look at LeBron James as this elite athlete, but he comes from Akron, Ohio, which is completely polluted. So, and this goes on two sides of it, right? Because we want to look at athletic performance, and this is why we had to get banned substance approval on both products, is just because someone is an elite athlete doesn't mean they're not polluted, right? Because when do you see many professional athletes in their 50s and 60s? No, that's when they degrade, right? That's when everything starts to fail a little bit, because
ironically,
we're deceived with all of this stuff.
All of these sportsmen seem to be dying at early 70s.
Yeah.
it's 72, 74, 73, 70, 69. They're all dying. They're not actually for the healthy lifestyle supposedly that they've had, the outdoor life and doing all the right things supposedly that we've all been led to believe they have. And all of a sudden, at 70 plus, 70 and a bit, they're all dropping down. And a lot were going with motor neuron disease, Alzheimer's. And it's all like, hang on a minute, not all footballers head the ball. It's...
But
Arsenal, you can't even kick it, but there you go.
You have to look at the other side of the equation, right? Because metals are neurotoxic. Mercury and aluminum, we all have them in us. We're all exposed to them constantly over time. But there's one thing that holds true for a lot of athletes early on. Unless you play, American football and you're a lineman. How many elite athletes are fat? Don't see many of them, right? They're lean, especially like real footballers. And you can throw in rugby. I mean, you get people that are extremely fit. So they're no different than the rest of us. So your detox pathways function the same way. So most of this stuff's going to get stored, but if you're burning off the fat constantly, you're going to end up having a lot of those metals end up in your brain, where they can't be sequestered. They aren't stored in fat. So there's going to be more stuff stored up there. You're going to have, things being stored in tissue in different areas. And over time, as we deal with neurotoxicology, even if you don't have the impacts, you have those metals in your brain. So over time, they're going to, if they're not given the opportunity to move quickly, which is where the concussions and the increase in ionic activity in the brain happen. But if you have a higher amount of metals in your brain over time, they're going to be attracted to one another and they're going to build up that tau. They're going to cause the Alzheimer's, the dementia, the memory issues and such, the cognitive issues that go along with it. But you're also going to see joint issues and inflammation in the joints because you're doing a lot of impacts in those areas, whether it's running or playing or whatever you're doing. And metals will conglomerate in those areas as well. And so that's where you see a lot of osteoarthritis or, damage over time because the healing process doesn't take place properly because of the damage done to those areas. So it's just a different perspective, but you kind of release the dam because a lot of that's been held back. But when they stop competing, they stop playing, things start to flood loose and they go, oh, well, now here's what you get to play with, so, and the same thing goes with diabetes, right? You see a lot of ex-athletes that will become type 2 diabetic, later on in life.
There's an awful lot of sportsmen diabetic.
Yeah. And so you look at that and then, I can pack on pounds pretty easily because I love to eat like I'm still competing and still training, even though I don't. Right. And then it's not as much the metabolism of the food, but how your body is able to work with all of those. And that just comes down to function and toxicology and really, really identifying the issues because, and this is what's so important to understand with this. It doesn't matter how elite you are physically, you're polluted. You are. Now look at that as the inverse. If you take active athletes, and we've seen this in the groups already with the increases in performance in VO2 max and heart rate improvements and overall performance enhancement. If you take an elite athlete, we'll use Cristiano Ronaldo. I'll use Lionel Messi as an example because they're like real athletes, right? And because they're footballers and, not like American football. If you take a guy like that, that's already elite and you can improve his performance or his output by 5%. Are you serious? I mean, you apply that into athletics. Or here, let's take one other step and let's look at the animal side of things with the sport of kings, with thoroughbreds, right? And they're constantly vaccinated because of their travel. But if you can tweak hundreds of seconds or maybe a second off of a time, it's worth millions of dollars.
Billions.
And if you can improve proprioception, which we know removing heavy metals can do, you can improve reaction time. So maybe they get out of the gate quicker, but then their cardio output increases, their lung capacity improves a little bit. So they get faster, longer. And God knows what happens if we put horses on zero in. Crazy. But you look at the applications in sports performance, and we're honestly entering a new era in sports performance because of what we can do. And Dr. Rao was hitting on it last week when he's looking at homeostasis and what these polyphenols can do with what Zero In's doing and what Clean Slate is doing. I mean, we can knock down barriers for physical performance that we have never even thought of being barriers, because it's always what we've been capable of doing. But when you start to remove blockages and you open up elite athletes to function at a level of which was already unfamiliar to them. And I think Peter's a great example, because I think he's on here, of what he sees in training by using Clean Slate, not only morning and night, but after a workout. So it gives you a chance to change your perspective. And I'll give you guys one thing here now, because we're working on the press releases, but this should open up your mind to opportunities of sharing. So here in the United States, we have 1.2 million firefighters, full-time firefighters, not volunteers, that are full-time firefighters, not firemen, because there's firewomen now too. So we say firefighters. They are a population of people that sacrifice themselves for the greater good. They're the ones who run into a burning building when everyone else wants to run out. But statistically, primary causes of death in firefighters are cancer and heart disease due to environmental exposure. Not just from what they're exposed to in fires, but from what they wear. The PPE equipment, the personal protective equipment that they wear, is published and proven, and they're told that it will give you cancer. And we're in the process of doing the press releases to make this announcement in the next 2 days, I think. The National Fallen Firefighters Foundation here in the United States, which is the association that includes all 1.2 million firefighters, is happily in collaboration with Root, because we are going to raise a massive amount of money for them and help them address the number one problem that they all face, which is being completely toxic.
Yeah.
And they all know it.
Fantastic.
And so don't just look at what you can do on an individual basis.
No.
You have the ability to work with very, very large groups. And especially in 2020, did you guys know that 30% of all the nonprofits in the United States have gone out of business this year? 30% gone, not coming back, wiped out. And if you have the right organization that maybe has the right focus on what their purpose is, and on Monday or Sunday night, I did an event with Scott Hamilton, who has his Scott Hamilton Cares organization for cancer awareness, because Scott's had brain tumors 3 times and testicular cancer. You talk about brain cancer on all accounts, horrible. Both brains got hit. But his focus is in immunotherapy for cancer and working to prevent it. And what I didn't know, but chatting with him over dinner, his mom died, I think, when she was, I think he said 39 or 51, from malignant melanoma. And what's crazy is you look at the difference in philosophies and pathways. My dad had malignant melanoma, but we got rid of it in 30 days. And my dad hasn't had a single recurrence in 16 years. And so the big thing for these nonprofits is how to raise more money, how to overcome shortfalls because of this new environment that we're in, but also how can they collaborate with organizations to better spread their message. I mean, think about this. How much more powerful is it for an organization to say, hey, look, we're working in collaboration with an organization that rewards us for helping people. The missions align. And instead of us asking you for money to say, hey, will you donate to our cause? They can say, hey, look, we've created a collaboration with this organization because our mission, our vision, our purpose all aligns. We found that there's great benefit here. And when you make a purchase of these products, which we found are phenomenal, we recommend them to all of our members, that 15, 20% of all of the revenue that's purchased through them goes to their organization.
Fantastic.
I mean, that's the power of what we have. But now we're starting to see the application, not just from the individual side, but from groups. And that's the beautiful part of what you guys have. And then the coolest thing, what we're going to do with the NFFF is the expansion of each firehouse. All of the firemen in each firehouse purchase, so it raises money for the firehouse, but then it's also raising money for the foundations. This is the power of the model. This is what compassionate capitalism looks like. It's a redistribution of assets, because instead of selling phenomenal products and having the company keep all the money, we're putting it back in the community. However you guys deem you want to distribute it. Think about that. That's the power of having solutions, but in a model that is service driven, right? You can help with the kids. You can help each individual. You can also help organizations. How many of you wouldn't mind taking this video when it's posted and going to the local diabetes associations that are in your community and go, hey, you know what? You want a different perspective on this? Maybe we should look at collaborating. I know the company would love to, but I can help you set this up. It's really easy. How easy is that? How many people with diabetes wouldn't want this information that we're just going over right now? That they're not going to get it from anywhere else, because as Dori had mentioned, this type of research, this type of analysis is not found in the traditional allopathic community. It's just not available because they're not doing it. They don't know how to tie this stuff together because they're not taught. They don't understand the environmental toxicological effects of our environment from conception all the way through. They're looking at the lab work and saying, okay, these are the things I need to treat. You have to change your perspective. You have to change perspectives. And here in the United States, we've got Thanksgiving in 2 days. I mean, this is the opportune time because we have so much to be thankful for in 2020 because of why we're here and what we have access to. While everyone else believes that there's just absolute chaos going on in the world. I mean, I'm dancing a jig every day because when I wake up in the morning, I get to read messages about, hey, you got to see what's happened to this person or this person, and this has happened in my life. And I get to transfer money to people every day. And all they're doing is sharing with friends and changing lives. How cool is that? Awesome. That's the gist of it. So let me see. I'll get into a couple of these. So Alexis had asked about hair loss. And here's one thing that sounds scary. Yeah, your hair can fall out because you're polluted. But here, this just in, it grows back better than ever. I mean, the only gray hairs I have are on my chin from being stressed out from having kids now. And I try to look like Mark as much as I can. I don't, you know what? I was going to do 23andMe to see if I had that sexy gene that you have. I can't find it. I don't have it.
Unique is unique.
Yeah, it is.
Unique.
Hey, Clayton, I just wanted to say something because, Mark had asked about, was it vitamins? Was it this or that for the athletes? And what about, like the synthetic turf that all these guys have been on?
Oh.
I mean, this is loaded with heavy metals and chemicals and stuff like that. And they start from the time they're little boys or girls. And training on this kind of stuff. I mean, it's in stadiums and stuff like that. It's loaded with cadmium and all kinds of toxic heavy metals and things like that and chemicals. So that's another point.
You see a massive amount of that now, especially in kids. And there was actually the first study on that was at the University of Washington back in my home, because it was going on. It was early 2000s. So it was about 15 years ago. we had a bunch of girls and boys, but I think that the prevalence was higher in girls that were showing high levels of leukemia. And they were all soccer players.
Yeah.
Real footballers. And what they started to look at was what causes were, but also this specific type of player that was the one that was getting leukemia. It wasn't all of the players. It was the keepers. It was the goalies, because they were the ones constantly diving on the turf and getting and it's not as much the synthetic turf itself, it's the rubber, the ground up rubber that they use as the base that causes the problems. Well, here's, and why do they use that rubber? Because the rubber absorbs a little water and it helps provide texture. You know what's interesting? Clinoptilolite's actually a better source as using for filler than the rubber.
Wow.
Not saying I haven't looked into it and looking at a model for it, but it's on the list of things to do in the future. But yeah, I mean, you have to look at exposure where before we always played on grass. Now with the synthetics, the rates of exposure have gone up dramatically, and you just get to play with the games.
I just think if there's anybody in your team that can help me and people like Peter, who's obviously in the sporting and fitness arena, that we can put together a presentation to present to these so-called sporting nutritionists to say, hang on a minute, are you missing the point here? Because you're pumping these guys full of all this stuff in a plastic bottle that says it's full of this and it's full of that and it's all hydro this and hydro. What exactly are you putting into these guys? Plus as well, look at the environment that they're working in. Start looking at it now, because it isn't just about heading a football or getting involved in that's physically good at stimulating the brain, because it's testosterone being pushed all over the place, But yeah, I think there's a lot of mileage, especially at the moment. It's so prevalent. Every other news report on Sky Sports Channel over in the UK is about brain damage, head damage, brain damage, Alzheimer's, motor neuron disease. And I think it's something that needs to be explored. And I think if we can put together a decent presentation to simply say, hey, get a load of this.
I have one NFL team that I'm working with, their head of health and wellness, one of the 32. And he's had a focus in immune function and performance, to keep the guys healthy. And I sent him some samples because the offensive coordinator for the team loves this stuff. And that's actually why we had to get banned substance approval on both products, because they thought I was better than drugs, which it is. And they were working so well. They're like, this has to be illegal. There's no way that this can work this well. But it was interesting to get feedback from him, and they're in the middle of the season, so it's difficult to get a lot done right now. But their head of health and wellness is like, I need more of this stuff because I don't function as well without it, and my joints don't hurt when I'm using the clean slate, and the Zero N's amazing. So whether you look at it from a performance enhancement perspective, or if you look at it from a wellness and prevention perspective, both are crucial. One's more valuable than the other, but one allows you to enjoy what you can create while competing.
I see it from a Stephen Rao point of view, where I'm seeing it as a balance.
Yes, and that's exactly it. It doesn't matter what stage in life that you're at. Everything is about balance. It's yin and yang and finding homeostasis. It's what we always try to get back to, and not be out of it.
Well, that's it for time.